Welcome ladies and gentlemen to the best outer space build guide. Hi, I'm Mon, and looking into outer space, this weapon has received a buff recently, for PvE at least, so let's get right into building it, starting with an overview of its weapon features to understand how it works. Starting with the first feature, 30% chance of triggering Power Surge when hitting an enemy. Now if you don't know what Power Surge is, it's pretty much a proc of status / elemental damage bonus of 50% of your psi intensity, and will also inflict Power Surge status, which is an accuracy debuff. Power Surge is of shock element type, so it cannot crit, cannot strike weak spots, and its damage will not decay with distance. Now back to the weapon features. Upon hitting a target affected by Power Surge 15 times, you'll summon lightning on the target to deal shock elemental damage of 300% psi intensity, which only deals 40% of its damage against players. So this is the main bread and butter weapon feature, as it's essentially a Power Surge nuke that happens once every second. Then, after reloading, you gain 40% extra Power Surge trigger chance that is based on the weapon's trigger chance for 6 seconds. So it's essentially an extra 12% trigger chance bonus for Power Surge for the next 6 seconds after a reload. And lastly, shock elemental damage plus 30%. So from all these features, it should be pretty clear that this is an elemental oriented weapon, so psi intensity is going to be the main important base stat here, which is affected by your armor stars. So if you wish to deal more damage with this weapon, then star up your armor. Now moving on to the weapon calibration that you're going to want to run, that will be heavy style to help you make the most out of the Power Surge trigger chance effect that lasts a long time. If you don't use heavy style, you won't be able to benefit from that weapon feature fully. And for the calibration substats, you'll want to use double elemental since outer space is an elemental oriented weapon. For the accessories, I'm running the assault brake for the accuracy, the compact reflex sight for the stability, the tactical laser sight for even more accuracy, and of course the weighted SMG mag for more bullets to benefit from the extra Power Surge trigger chance. As for the ammo that you want to use, the 3 best kind of ammo to use will be blasting AP ammo, suppression AP ammo, and penetration AP ammo depending on the type of content that you're clearing. Moving on to your secondary weapons and melee weapons, starting with your secondary, when you're bossing, you're going to want to use the bingo. And the reason for this is because after switching to this weapon, the first hit is guaranteed to trigger the bullseye effect, which is 8% vulnerability by default, which will buff the outer space's damage. Now the bingo also grants weak spot damage bonus and 15% attack after defeating an enemy with a weak spot hit, though they aren't really the most important buffs for the outer space. Now if you don't have the bingo, then sure you could use the wildfire to trigger the bullseye as well. However, if you're doing overworld content or if you're in an area with lots of enemies, then you can use critical pulse. The reason for this is because the outer space isn't really that good for AoE scenarios, so you'll find much better results with critical pulse, which shines in AoE content, though will be bad for single target, and the outer space will cover single target scenarios. Not only that, but the critical pulse also uses the same key gear that the outer space uses. For the melee weapon, you will want to use the kukri. And the reason for this is because when defeating an enemy with a heavy strike, you'll gain 20% psi intensity, which is a really important buff for elemental oriented weapons such as the outer space. And now to the important part, you will need ice cubes crafted by the ice pod deviation. And the reason for this is because the ice cubes count as enemies for the kukri. So here, just to prove it, if I take a look at my psi intensity, I'm sitting at 510, and if I defeat this ice cube with a heavy strike, you'll see that my psi intensity has increased to 612. For the deviation, unfortunately we still don't have a dedicated deviation for Power Surge weapons, so you'll have to use Mini Feaster, and the reason why is because the Mini Feaster will give status damage bonus, and it will max out at 80% total. And now there is a trick to use this deviation effectively. So if we read the description, it says continuously follows the player and summons one tentacle near an enemy every 1.5 seconds. This means that let's say you're doing a silo, you'll want to summon the mini feaster before you even get to the boss room so that it starts stacking up tentacles, so that once you're in the boss room, you instantly start at 80% status damage bonus instead of 20%. Moving on to key gear, between all of the Power Surge key gear options, there is only one option, and that will be the Mayfly goggles, as no other key gears synergize well with outer space. So the Mayfly goggles give Power Surge trigger count +1, which in simple terms makes it so that each time you trigger Power Surge, it'll actually deal 2 instances of damage instead of 1. It also has a secondary effect, but that'll be explained later when I go over the mods. Then it decreases your Power Surge damage by 30%. So it's essentially a 1.4 damage bonus since you'll trigger Power Surge twice per proc, however each proc deals 30% less damage. Now the reason why the other key gears don't work is because if we take a look at Gas Mask Hood, it's after triggering Power Surge, crit rate plus 35%, and Outer Space is an elemental oriented weapon, so it won't really make use of that crit rate. Then, the yellow paint mask is just dog water. And lastly, for the overloaded pants, it cannot really use the overloaded pants effect effectively because it only works after you trigger Power Surge 20 times, and then the bonus only lasts for the next 6 shots, which the Outer Space will just go through in less than a second. Now, before I talk about the gear sets, if you're learning something new or wish to see more Once Human content, then make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell for notifications. And with that, we continue forward to the gear sets. Starting with the best option, it's going to be the low HP preset, that being 3-piece Treacherous and 2-piece Shelter. The 2-piece Shelter will give a permanent 8% elemental damage bonus, and here we cannot use 2-piece Blackstone because the stacks last only for 2 seconds, and when you're reloading with the Outer Space, it's going to take more than 2 seconds, so each time that you reload, you'll have to rebuild the stacks, which take quite a while. As for the 3-piece Treacherous, it'll give you 50% weapon and status damage bonus as long as your HP is below 70% and as long as you have low sanity, which can be achieved by consuming a plethora of food items. Now, I'm not going to name them all, but a few examples are the new Sanity Corrosion Capsule, which you can craft on the stove and will reduce your sanity by 100 points if it's not buffed by the chef. You'll also have Dirty Water and Spoiled Food. Now, although the 3-piece effect from Treacherous does not require you to have 0% sanity, but because we're going for the setup with the most amount of damage bonus, you'll want to reduce your sanity to 0% to lock your HP at a very low level. Now, if you don't want to play the game while being that low HP, then you can opt for 3-piece Shelter and 2-piece Treacherous and use the Sanity Corrosion Capsules or anything else to lock your HP to 70%. This will give you less bonuses than the previous one, as the 3-piece Shelter effect only gives you 20% elemental damage bonus, and those stats are reset by half each time you reload. Now, as for the last option, if you really don't want to play around with your HP, or if the content you're doing automatically heals your sanity, such as in the new Dream Zones in the Endless Dream scenario, where killing enemies in the Dream Zones automatically restore your sanity, then you'll want to use 4-piece Shelter with 1-piece Lone Wolf. The 1-piece Lone Wolf will give you more ammo to benefit from the extra Power Surge trigger chance, whereas the 4th Shelter piece will increase your max Deviant Energy stack by 10, which is the elemental damage bonus that you can get, and will make it so that each time you hit a weak spot, you'll stack up your elemental damage faster. Now, for your mask hide, the usual best hide to use is going to be Lucky Rabbit Fur. It's going to give you 10% elemental damage bonus as long as you deal any sort of damage. Now here, I know it does say after scoring a crit, but that's just not true. Now, if you can't afford that, and if you use the low HP playstyle, then you could use Lunar Rabbit Fur, which is 5% elemental damage bonus, but the effect doubles if your HP is below 30%. Moving on to Cradle perks, I'm currently in a non-novice scenario, so I'll go over those. You'll want Anti-Coherence for the SMG damage bonus and for the damage bonus against coherence anomalies, Status Enhancement for the status damage bonus, Elemental Sense and Transient Impact for the Power Surge damage bonus, Deviant Energy Defense for the shield, Aerial Suppression and Tactical Leap for the damage bonus and damage reduction against all types of anomalies. Though this time, their effects have changed a little, so I will dive deeper into how they work and how to effectively make use of them since they're not sanity based anymore. As for the last perk, you'll want to use Tactical Combo because there's not really anything else that's better than it. So now, starting with the explanation of Aerial Suppression, it is while airborne, damage received from monsters is reduced by 30%. Now, just like the previous iteration, the damage reduction applies to any kind of enemy in the game. And here, though it says while airborne, all what it means is as long as you're in the air, you will get that damage reduction. So now I currently have nothing equipped, no mod, no nothing, and only this Cradle, and if I just jump and take a look at my stat sheet, you'll see that I get the 30% damage reduction against all types of enemies in the game. Now, as for Tactical Leap, it's for every 1 second spent airborne, gain 20% damage against deviants. So once again, this is the same thing as the previous iteration. The damage bonus applies to any kind of enemy in the game. And plus 10% damage against their shields for 3 seconds, and you can get this effect up to 60 seconds. So the way how this works is you'll see that at the bottom of my screen, I have the Tactical Leap effect right here, and essentially for every second you spend in the air, you will get 3 seconds where you'll get all of these buffs. So the usual way to proc this is if you're in a Visual Wheel server, then you'll just proc this easily because of all of the air content and you'll be staying in the air for long. So right here you'll see that I have 22 seconds where I have all of this buff. However, if you're not in a Visual Wheel server, just like me, who is in endless streams, then you're going to want to proc this via 3 different ways. And the first way is with jump boosters. So jump boosters are craftables that you unlock in the mimetic specialization from level 5 to 15. And what they do is essentially you use them to gain the double jump ability for 30 seconds. And each one has 5 uses. So essentially what you're going to want to do is to just turn it on and then you're going to start double jumping. And while doing your silo, you're going to be doing this. And as you can see at the bottom of my screen, these stacks are going up. So the second way to do this is if you're doing any silo or any content, you can just find anything that is like of this height and you just jump on it and then you jump away and you use the bird, and like this you'll have the buff, and from that moment onwards you're just gonna have to spam your jump button to keep those stacks. So as you can see at the bottom of my screen right now, I still have those 3 seconds where I have all of these buffs. However, the moment that I stop jumping, you'll see that the stacks will start to decrease. Now the second way to do this is going to be via the spring legs. And what the spring legs will do is essentially you will jump much higher now. So you'll be able to proc this effect by simply jumping in the air. You won't need to pull the bird out or anything, just jump. Though this method does have its disadvantage, which is the fact that from now on, if you use the frog whim, each jump you do will consume stamina. But yeah, this is pretty much how you make use of Tactical Leap. Moving on to the food buffs. If you are using Bullseye as secondary, then you'll want to eat Mixed Fried Hot Dog for the increased damage against marked enemies. This is the strongest buff available as it counts as damage against X-type multiplier, which is the multiplier you have the least of, so it'll be the best. However, if you use Critical Pulse as secondary, then you'll want to use Bone and Deviated Sausage for the 15% damage bonus against bosses when you're bossing. And if you're not fighting bosses and use Critical Pulse as your secondary, then you'll want to eat Sparkling Pumpkin Soup for the Power Surge damage bonus. Now I know that it is located in the drinks section, but if you consume that, you'll see that here, it actually counts as the food slot. Then, for the drinks buff, you'll want to use Whimsical Drink for that status damage bonus. For the Suffix and Substats priority, let's start with the weapon and with the mask mod, which can have keyword suffix mods, here being Power Surge Suffix. And so you'll want to use Power Surge Suffix here because of the lack of Power Surge damage bonus that you have, and also because of this linked attribute right here, damage plus 8% on targets with Power Surge. This is really strong because it counts as damage against X-type. Now if you're really lucky, what you'd have is something like Power Surge damage bonus, then as linked attribute, you'd have shock damage bonus and damage plus 8% on targets with Power Surge, and you'd have 1 damage bonus against X-type as general attribute. But if not, then the 3 lines you should look for will be Power Surge damage bonus, damage on targets with Power Surge, and 1 damage against X-type. As for the helmet mod and the top mod, you would want to go ideally with a Lunar Suffix mod that rolls into elemental damage bonus and status damage bonus. The reason for this being is that they scale 2 times higher than Talent Suffix, the suffix that you would normally go for. And with this chart, you can see that even at around 70% HP, you're gaining more bonuses than Talent Suffix, which is why we're going with Lunar Suffix. Though of course, if you do not have access to Lunar Suffix mods, then you'll want to go with a Talent Suffix mod. But for everything else, so pants, boots, and gloves, you will want to go with Talent Suffix, with status damage bonus as linked attribute, and 2 damage bonuses against X-type as general attributes. Now, before talking about mods to run, I just want to share that if you aren't sure how mods work or how and where to get them, then I've got this mod spreadsheet for you to check out. Every mod in the game is in there, and the link will be in the description and pinned comment. And now, starting with the Outer Spaces mods, for the Outer Space, the best mod to use is going to be Static Shock. It's going to give you a permanent 20% power surge damage increase, which is really good. Although here it does say power surge status duration minus 50%, this doesn't really matter because this is only the accuracy debuff that power surge status inflicts. The other options aren't really that good. Surge Amplifier says that it'll stack your power surge damage bonus up to 20 stacks, but the problem is that first of all you need to stack it up, and second, it only stacks up to 15%. Then, the effect of Shock Diffusion, which is when triggering Power Surge, apply the Power Surge status to one enemy within 10 meters of the target, just isn't useful at all for the Outer Space. And lastly, for Shock Rampage, it grants you up to 20% Power Surge trigger chance, which is based on the weapon's trigger chance, which in the end isn't enough, because that is 20% times 30%, which in the end you'll only be gaining 6% of extra Power Surge trigger chance. Then, moving on to your secondary weapon, if you are using the crossbow, so the critical pulse, once again, you're going to want to use Static Shock, but if you're using the bullseye weapon, then you're going to want to run Vulnerability Amplifier to increase your vulnerability debuff by an extra 8%. As for the melee mod, it really doesn't matter, you're literally only using the Kukri to destroy the ice cubes, but if you want to know what I'm running, then I'm running Melee Amplifier. Then, for the helmet mod to run, the best helmet mod is going to be Deviation Expert. It grants you 20% status damage bonus and 10% fire rate, which will increase your DPS and your damage. Now here, it does decrease your range by minus 25%, but that's only going to affect your normal bullets damage. So it's not really that important of a debuff. Now there aren't really other mods to run in the helmet category, except for maybe Work of Proficiency, which increases your reload speed and elemental damage bonus when you reload with an empty magazine. However, this mod forces you to reload with an empty magazine, nor does it increase your fire rate, so you're just overall going to lose DPS, and not only that, it's going to be a little annoying to use it. Then, for the mask mod, the best mod to use is going to be Thunderclap, which is after triggering Power Surge 20 times, the current hit summons Celestial Thunder, which is shock damage of 200% psi intensity. The description is slightly wrong here, it's not the next hit, it is on the 20th time you trigger Power Surge, it'll trigger Celestial Thunder. So this is the best option, and not only that, this is a counter-based mod, which means that the extra Power Surge trigger count from the Mayfly goggles will reduce that counter need by half. So you won't need to trigger Power Surge 20 times, you'll only need to trigger it 10 times. And you can't really use the other Power Surge mod, which is First Electrocution, because First Electrocution forces you to hit enemies without the Power Surge status, and the Outer Space does give the Power Surge status. Then for the Gloves mod, your two choices are between Elemental Overload and Status Enhancement. And here the choice is going to depend whether or not if you need more elemental damage bonus or more status damage bonus. And the goal here is to balance out your elemental and status damage bonuses. Then, moving on to your shoe mod, if you are using the low HP playstyle, then you're going to want to use Rush Hour. Now, Rush Hour gives you 4% weapon and status damage bonus every 10% HP lost, and with the low HP build, you will permanently be under 50% HP, which means you will always get that 24% weapon and status damage bonus. However, if you're not using the low HP preset, then you're going to want to use Covered Advance, because between all of the remaining other mods, it's either less conditional or gives more bonuses, as Covered Advance grants you 20% weapon and status damage bonus for 30 seconds if you don't take damage for only 4 seconds. Then, moving on to top mod, just pick any defensive gold mod of your choice with Lunar Suffix, and ideally the best substats possible. Lastly, for the Pants mod, the best Pants mod to use is going to be Elemental Resonance, which is for each instance of elemental damage dealt from the previous magazine, the next magazine gains elemental damage +1 for 15 seconds upon reloading, stacking up to 24%. This is going to be the best option. Now for the other options, there is Precision Charge, which is essentially Elemental Resonance, but just a worse version because Precision Charge requires you to hit weak spots with your bullets. And not only that, the buffs last shorter. Now, if you use the crossbow, you could run abnormal increase, which is when the magazine is empty, status damage plus 10% for 12 seconds, and the effect can stack up to 3 times. But that's going to kind of require you to always monitor your buff timer, which is pretty annoying because if you don't use the crossbow and you only use the outer space, you won't be able to stack this effect up to 3 times because the outer space takes too long to dish out its mag and to reload. But this is it for this guide. If you learned something and wish to see more Once Human content, then make sure to have liked this video, subscribe to my channel, and turn on the bell for any notifications. Feel free to ask your questions down in the comments below. This is Mon. Peace out.